And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We are here to do another MLS transfer roundup. We have kind of not hit on this as much recently, but so much has gone down in the past week and a half that it just makes sense to cover some of the big moves in, some of the ones out, and we're going to focus on the different types of ways that certain teams are handling this window. Are they building to win a championship or push for the top of the table? Or are they building to make their way from the bottom into the playoffs? What is their outlook? And then there are other teams like the great New York Red Bull who are building to make more money. So I'm Andrew, and then I got Connor over there who decides he doesn't want to talk. He muted himself, even though it's kind of his episode. I really should have let him preview this, but what's good, buddy?
Listen, I was coughing, and if I coughed with the mic unmuted, you would have complained. So I was doing it for your sake. So you're welcome.
Okay. Well, you didn't tell me how you're doing, so
But you don't need to know that. You don't need to know that. I'll leave that. I'm a man of mystery.
you're a man of great aggravation. That's what you are.
That's how I like to be.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go and lead us into scarf of the week, and I'll still let you go first there, and then it's over to you, buddy. You do your thing.
All right. Well, I tried to break the scarf out 2 episodes ago because I thought we were going to talk about this, and I was sorely mistaken. So I'm not going to copy scarves, but it's the same team. I'm bringing out the St. Louis one. So we are going to talk about somebody from St. Louis today. There's a long list. Oh, this would have been a good one for the LAFC scarf, but that's all right.
Your preparation is poor, but that's okay.
What else is new? Tell me something I don't know.
Facts.
How about you
Um,
tell me about your scarf instead?
I will. I'd love to. And it is about one of the teams that we're talking about trying to rebuild and push for a playoff spot, and that is. See if I get it right this time.
That team doesn't exist
That team
anymore. What
don't
are you
exist
talking about?
anymore. Team
They're
that
not
does not
pushing.
exist.
They're not pushing for anything. The lack of pro rel murdered that team. Add it to the list.
The Montreal Impact or CF Montreal. It is a team that is right again. There's not many teams that you can look at or like, yeah, it's over and done for you. I mean, they're in 11th place. They're 1 point out of the playoffs, and they are making moves to set themselves up for a late push this year and then a very, very strong 2025 season. But that's all I have to say. It's now over to Connor to run the show.
All right. Well, thanks for handing me the keys. I do not promise to bring the car back in one piece. All right, so we're gonna run through a bunch of different transfers and moves in and out of the league that have happened as of late. There's been a lot going on, as Andrew had said, so there's a lot to cover here. We're gonna try to kind of group it together by team, so we'll cover majority of the moves by team. We're not gonna cover every team because not every team has had movement so far, but we'll just kind of talk about how their fit is, and then we can kind of go over the points that Andrew was talking about before, where we talk about what kind of direction is this team heading towards? Are they making a push for the top of the top? Are they making a push just to make it in the playoffs? Or are they maybe looking to rebuild and try again next year? Let's start things off with RSL, who've been a bit busy this window, bringing in 4 players just in this summer window. And that includes Diogo Gonçalves from Copenhagen. It includes Javane Brown from Vancouver, Lachlan Brook from Western Sydney, and Benji Michel from the couch. All right, so let's start off with the big one. Diogo Gonçalves coming over from Copenhagen, former Benfica player coming into the midfield. 3 million fees what transfer market has listed for him. So a decent chunk of money, but nothing record breaking. What are your thoughts? How does he fit into the team? How does he change things going forward for RSL?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is a team that needed that last game changer, right? I mean, they brought in Matt Crooks, and he's been okay, but it really hasn't been that difference maker. I think that they were expecting him to be. Gonçalves as a natural central midfielder, but more in the attacking sense of the word, is the guy that you're looking for. I mean, if you go back and you look at what he's done for Copenhagen, right? Europa League, Super League of Championships. I mean, tons of experience with Copenhagen, you mentioned Benfica playing in the Champions League, minimal minutes, of course, but that experience that we talk about in 2022, he had over 100 minutes in the Champions League. Big results in Liga NOS with Famalicão. If you go all the way back to 2019, 2020, his output isn't crazy for the Portuguese league, but he was fairly solid with the Copenhagen side, where he put up 21 goals and 8 assists in just 57 games across a whole bunch of different competitions and stuff. But I think RSL is kind of going with the attack by committee, if you will. Like whoever's the hot hand is going to play, and whoever's making the difference is going to be that sort of player. He's very useful out on the wings, on the flanks as well. Very versatile player, something that RSL does a lot of, right? Matty Crooks was kind of the same way. He could play out wide, he could play inside. You've seen Chicho Arango playing off the line a little bit with Anderson in front of him. I mean, they love to use players in various positions, and I think this is another person just kind of in the tool belt, and something that you can see them trying to build towards as a very fluid attacking group, a group that, as we know, is already a very strong attacking group. Leading the Western Conference in goals with 51. I think leading everybody who's not Miami with 51 goals. So it is just another feather in the cap for a team that is trying to push for the top of the table. They are 5 points out with a game in hand on the Galaxy, but they are 3 points behind LAFC, who have 2 games in hand. So it will be a little bit of a different push for them. But I like it. I like the ambition. Whether or not it is going to work or what have you, I like the ambition.
Yeah, I would agree. I like the move as well. I think it's in a position of need for them. Whose court has them running a 4-2-3-1, and obviously RSL fans can tell us if they're actually running something different. But in that 4-2-3-1, they are running with Ojeda and Anelli, I think most often in the deeper midfield spots, and then Matt Crooks most often in the number 10 spot. And again, RSL fans can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe he's doing the small things well, but Crooks is rated pretty poorly. And I think that's probably because he's just not contributing to a lot of goals right now. He's got 5 goal contributions in 1,400 minutes. That's just not really good enough from your number 10. And I think Gonçalves, not necessarily being an out and out number 10, can suit that role a bit more, or he can give you a little bit more attacking help from somewhere in the midfield as well if he's playing a bit deeper in one of the roles of Anelli or Ojeda. So I think it's a move in the right direction to look to solve a problem that they're currently experiencing, because around them in the attack, around Matt Crooks in the attack, has been lethal. I mean, Gomez has been unbelievably good. Chicho is MVP level this season. Diego Luna has been, I would say, quietly good, just because I think the only reason I say quietly is because Gomez and Aranjo have been so explosive this year. But Luna has 13 goal contributions in 1,700 minutes, which is really solid return as well. So if you can kind of figure out that number 10 spot, that should be one of the best attacks in the league. Like almost no defense in this league will be able to stop that if they're on their game. You could ask the question though, like, should this have been the number one priority? And maybe that leads us into some of the other players that they have brought in. So why don't we kind of head in that direction with Javane Brown? RSL have had some defensive issues this year in terms of availability and just defensively in general. So they brought in Javane Brown here from Vancouver on a free. Does this help them in defensive depth? Does it improve their defense? Or is he just kind of going to be a body to soak up minutes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really weird move in general for Vancouver, a team that Brown was really solid with. The idea with him at Vancouver was to use him as kind of like a right center back in this 3-5-2 instead of the right wing back that he probably would have fit a little bit better in. They brought in another younger right back at 20 years old, probably to fill that role, but they weren't getting the most out of Brown. And I think he kind of, from what I remember, he was kind of pushing his way out a little bit, saying like, if you're not going to play me where I want to play, send me somewhere that will. And that was RSL, who now has picked up a very strong, serviceable MLS level right back for the cost of a salary, right? They were relatively low as well. You had Bode Hidalgo, who has been fluxed around a lot at 22 years old. Emeka Anelli was kind of playing out there every once in a while. They needed somebody, I think, who was more of a lockdown. I can play here every week in, week out. I mean, Andrew Brody was out there for a little bit. I don't know if he wasn't really holding it down as well as he probably should have. This is putting Javian Brown in a spot to say, come in, earn the spot, and help us make that push. Bless you, Grace. You're
So
right. They weren't as strong as you'd maybe like them to be defensively. I mean, not terrible by any stretch of the imagination, right? But you're looking to chase down teams like LAFC who've only conceded 30 goals. You're looking to hold off teams like Houston and Seattle who are at 30 and 29. Any little bit that can get you that strength going forward in these last couple of games is going to help you. And I think he also gives you more going forward than any of the others did as well. So if you want to get him involved in the attack, he can give you some of that as well.
I personally would like to see him play in the right back spot. And again, RSL fans, please feel free to correct this, but who scored has Brody as playing the most at right back,
Mm-hmm.
who's obviously not a natural right back. He's a left back being played at the right back spot. So I think Javane Brown could be an option there if they want to actually have a natural right back in that position. I don't personally like Javane Brown as a center back in a two center back formation. I think it's good if they wanted to experiment with going with three center backs. I think he could be a good option there considering he has experience with it already. But in a two center back formation, I am not a huge fan of that. I think that could open RSL up a bit to a bit more of defensive problems. His FBref numbers defensively at the center backs, like compared to other center backs, is pretty poor. So I think he'd be better as a right back because he, compared to other center backs, he's very good on the ball. He's very good with passing, which to me just feels like it's a good spot for him at the outside back spot where he doesn't have to be as locked down defensively, but can add a bit more to the attack. But still, I mean, it's good to add more people, especially with Javane Brown. He's very experienced in the league. So I think I can't see it being a bad thing. I can only see it being a good thing. But I think the right way to use him is at the outside back spot.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more.
All right. So then the last two we've got here for RSL, and I'm going to group them together because they're both on the wings. We've got Lachlan Brook from Western Sydney, as we talked about before, and Benji Michel coming over as a free agent. So, what are your thoughts on their impact? I would assume, considering how good they've been in the attack, probably not going to see a lot of starter minutes, but what kind of a bench impact do you see these guys having, if any at all? Or do you think that these are more moves for the future?
No, and I mentioned it earlier, right? It's part of this idea that I think they're going to go with where they are going with committee, right? You've got a lot of games in a short amount of time, and you are going to need as many hands on deck as you can to keep up with the LAs, the LAFCs of this conference. So Benji Michel, I love. I've always liked Benji Michel when he was here with Orlando. Then he moved on to Portugal and was there for a year or so. But I always thought Benji Michel brought a lot to MLS when he was here. I thought he was really, really solid. Not like a standout, oh wow, this guy's gonna be, the next big thing. But I mean, he's got, 19 goals, 13 assists for Orlando when in his time here. Like he was serviceable enough where you can trust him as a wide player if you needed to rotate him in. So I really love that move. I've wanted to see him back in for a little bit just because I thought he brought enough where it warranted that. Lachlan Brook, an interesting move. I think again a something that we mentioned a little bit a couple episodes ago, where there's this increased. I don't want to say reliance, but increased
An influx of
an
Australians.
influx of Australians coming in. I think this is like the fifth or sixth one just this offseason. Experienced time in England with Brentford and Crew Alexandra on some loans and stuff, but the move here is interesting. He's a wide player. He got the top goal scorer I see here as a top goal scorer in the Australian Cup, I believe it is. Yeah, Australian Cup, and 9 goals and 2 assists in 1,300 minutes. It's one of those things where I think this more than Benji Michel is a long term option, but it's a long term option that they can trust right now. Right? If they need to rotate somebody in and he can get up to speed quickly in terms of tactics and player movements and things like that, you can trust him to give you a decent shift with no problem. So I think he's more of a long term project than anything else. Anticipating maybe the Carlos Gomez's of the world may not be around much longer as they attract interest from other parts. But I don't think like it is a buy and stash. I think that he will give them again another option out wide, maybe a little bit more than a Michael Chang would, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a position that they needed depth in. So I think bringing in Michelle and Brooke is a good call. And I would agree. I personally think the Benji Michelle signing is the stronger one here. I think he has more instant impact. He knows the league. He's got experience in here. And I think he could be a really good piece off the bench to kind of make a difference, especially if they're making a playoff run. Just something to change things up, add a little spark off the bench. I'm not sure about, I don't really know enough about Brook to be able to say if he can do the same, but I think it's good depth to add for a guy that's coming off the best season of his career. He's in really good form, so I think it's a good call to bring him in. I do kind of like I would want to see what he could do long term because while he is coming off a really good season, his numbers when he was with Crew Alexander in League Two were pretty poor. But again, I don't know where he was being played. Maybe he was being played out of position, but he had like 1,600 minutes and only 3 goals and 0 assists, which is not good return for your winger. So I don't know how I feel yet about him as a long-term replacement, if that is the guy they want to bring in for Gomez, if Gomez moves on. But I think it's good moves to bring in to at least bolster for a playoff run. All right, so then let's just wrap it up. We'll wrap up RSL with the final question that we had talked about. With these moves, where do you see or how do you see these moves shaping the direction for RSL? Are they pushing for top of the West? Are they pushing to just make sure they stay in the playoffs? I mean, obviously they're not making moves to rebuild, but
No, but this is, I mean, it's pretty clear what this is, right? They're trying to, they know they're in win now mode, right? I think Tommy Scoops wrote a really good article about it. They know they're in win now mode. You need to strike while the iron's hot when you've got players all at the same time, like Chicharito, like Carlos Gomez, like Diego Luna, before they are on their way out. You need to capitalize on them being here. If that means you start dropping money to bring in those players right now to support them so that you can get the best chance that you have had since 2009 to win MLS Cup, you do that. I mean, I have no problem with it, and now it's just a matter of how quickly can they come together to push for that title. Because I'd really be shocked if they found a way to not make the playoffs this year. But once you're in there, it's a dice roll, right? So how can you put all of these pieces? We talk about teams that will sign a whole bunch of players and then it takes them 6 months before they all recognize how to play with each other. How many additions are too many additions in that sort of mindset is something to watch.
yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. Obviously, I think they're in win now mode considering they're what's 5 points off the top of the West. So I think you obviously want to make that push to finish top of the West, get as many home games as you can get. And as you said, playoffs is kind of a crapshoot. I mean, I think RSL is in a really good spot to make the playoffs. It would be a very big collapse for them to not make it at this point. But when you're in the playoffs, who do you have available to you to make the difference and just make that one play that's going to win you the game? And I think striking while the iron's hot is super important. I think Aranjo is obviously has the potential to move on from the team, but I think it's probably less likely considering his age. But Gomez and Luna could be out the door by this winter transfer window. So you got to take advantage while you got them and while they're in form. So I absolutely think the moves are in the right direction for them. We'll have to wait and see on how much of an impact they actually play for the team. I think Gonçalves is the one that has the most likely chance to have the biggest impact on the team for this season in particular.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we move on to the next team here then, and we'll go on to CF Montreal, and we'll focus on two moves in particular. We will focus on the additions of Jaquil Marshall Ruddy, and of course, Andrew's favorite, Former Red Bull Caden Clark.
He who only scores bangers, Caden Clark.
That is not true. That is a title specifically for Darlington Nagbe, and we will prove that in the next episode. All right, so why don't we start with the move for Jaquil Marshall-Rutty? So, is a trade involving Toronto FC where Montreal gets Jaquil Marshall-Rutty and Toronto gets potentially up to 1.3 million in GAM with 850,000 of that guaranteed and 450,000 of that conditional. Instant thoughts on just the trade itself. Do you think it was equal value on both ends? Do you think one team got a better of the deal?
I mean, this is a Toronto side that was walking around saying that they got the next $15 million outbound transfer in Jaquil Marshall-Rutty like a year ago. You fast forward a year now, not only have you only gotten him for roster flexibility, let alone not, let alone your 15 mil outgoing transfer, you gave him to your rivals, right? Like that is it's such a fall from grace for that organization who thought that this was going to be a, their ticket to the next big DP signing. They were going to sell him on and move him on. I think Montreal, it's a really interesting move because they just went out and picked up another young right back in Dawid Bugaj from Italian side SPAL. He's played 3 times in Leagues Cup so far. He started 2 of those games. I mean, I'll be honest, we haven't seen much of him to this point, but it is interesting that they are going to bring this up in a system like a 3-4-2-1, 3-5-2, whatever you want to call it. Where is JMR going to fit in? Are they going to look at a shape change? What is going to be the deal here? Because you are now looking, you got a host of very, very capable outside backs. You've got Raheem Edwards, who we've spoken about before, Tom Pierce coming in from Wigan, who has shown relatively well so far in Leagues Cup, a goal and an assist in 3 games, 2 starts. Then you go to the right side, you now have Jaquil Marshall-Rutty on top of Ruan, who has been playing there recently, and Bugaj, who just came in. Coaches say that it's a good problem to have when you've got competition in areas like this, but how good is that problem? Realistically, I don't know, right? I wouldn't be shocked. I almost would kind of hope to see a shape change where you've got maybe Bugaj, for example, on the right, playing behind Jaquil Marshall-Rutty as a wide player. And then you've got somebody like Kokoro or Martinez playing as a target man. And then on the left-hand side, you either go with Lassiter, Apoku, or even throwing Edwards up as a more attacking player with Tom Pierce behind him. Like your central midfield, and I mean this with no disrespect, is not really strong enough to warrant, the shape that you're in. And you can get away with rotating right backs the way you are with Joel Waterman leading a group of Joaquin Sosa, George Campbell, Corbo, whatever it may be. You can get away with playing 2 of those. So I really feel like this is leaning towards a shape change because it just doesn't make sense to start stockpiling young, promising outside backs and not playing them.
Unless they maybe stick with it this year and then try to make that change next
Sure,
year.
sure. It doesn't have to be this year particularly. You might see one of them get moved on, right? You might see players get moved on or what have you. But yeah, it's just definitely it's a weird roster makeup.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I really struggle to figure out the direction they want to go with this roster. To me, it feels like a very CF Montreal type roster where it's just like a mishmash of guys who potentially have potential. It's a weird way to say that, but a mishmash of guys with potential and just not really like any out and out stars on the team and just kind of running it with that and hoping somebody kind of breaks out. It feels like the amount of outside backs that they brought in has to be one of 2 things. Either, like you said, they're going for potentially a formation change or a system change, or they just weren't happy with what they were getting out of their outside backs in Ruan or Raheem Edwards or Ari Lassiter or Lapalainen or whoever. And they're just looking to bring in new people to potentially get in the mix there. I believe Marshall-Rutty has played on the left and the right side for Toronto, so if you
Mainly
needed him
the
to slide
right
on
though.
the
It's not. like left
Yeah, I
on
mean,
the
I know
left
he's
was
mainly the right guy, but if you needed him on the left, you could probably make it work. And then we'll cover Caden Clark, traded from Minnesota for 50,000 in GAM and a second round draft pick in the MLS Super Draft.
that's worth like $7 million.
It's kind of a small trade, so I'm not going to dive too much into like who won the trade, but how do you think Caden Clark plays into this? Because he's a bit of an interesting one too, because I believe in at least, I mean, definitely in his time with Red Bull, he was more of a midfielder. And then I think he may have played some outside back with Minnesota. So he's another interesting one to throw into this mix. Where do you see him having an impact with Montreal?
This feels like one of those moves that has we're losing another player written all over it. Like, and we're preparing for that next one. And I would imagine that with Shonier asking for transfers or trades or whatever, you're going to see Bryce Duke drop a little bit deeper. Might maybe Wanyama's on his way out too. Like, I mean, I don't really know the makeup of the contract situation at the moment, but this feels like a Caden Clark's going to come in and act as a rotational piece when Yankov is out, or one of the honestly, he could probably do a job on the wing as well. From I remember his time at Red Bull, he usually drifted out that wide, that wide area anyway. So he could probably do a job out on the wing if that's the case. But it feels very much like here's a high potential, low cost, high potential move that we could make. If we can fit him in and he starts performing, awesome. If he is good coverage for when we end up, making these moves down the line, great. If it doesn't work out, it's 50K in GAM and we move, right? We're getting that bump back in the CBA next year. Like it's worth, for a 6 month loan basically before you get that money back, it's worth it. It doesn't feel super impactful at the moment, especially as you mentioned with his, how do I phrase it? With his positional identity crisis, if you will. Like, am I a midfielder? Am I playing outside back? Like, clearly out of position for a lot of what he's doing. But I think Caden can make really, really strong impacts if given the right system in the right area. I just don't know where that is for him right now, and I think he needs a good system to make it work. So I'd be interested to see how that runs. Because I mean, like I said, he was balling out in MLS before he got that appendicitis, right? The thing that sidelines him, and then he goes back to Gerhard Struber, who is an attacking genius, for lack of a better term, and just really didn't hit the ground running. Then he goes over to Leipzig, doesn't get any time at Leipzig, gets put out on loan to the Denmark second division, gets 50 minutes since his time there, comes back to Minnesota, plays a good bit for Minnesota, just out of position. Where does he now fit? I have no idea. So that's going to be on Courtois to figure out. Be really interested to see how that plays out, because I in my heart of hearts I believe he has a lot still to give. It's just a matter of who can get it out of him, and if there's anybody in MLS right now that can work with the youth and get them to perform, it's Laurent Courtois.
Well, I'll say I would agree with you. I think it's just a low risk, potentially high reward move where it's 50K in game and a second round pick. It's really, you're not really missing anything by taking a flyer on Kane Clark, who once upon a time had massive potential. So if you can find a way to get that potential out of him again, I think that's huge, especially for the price that you were paying for it. So why not? There's no harm in it. I agree with you. I don't think he has much of an impact this season, probably more so for the future, for like you said, maybe a potential move of somebody out. But the question is, do you think those additions are enough for Montreal to make a serious playoff push? And I don't mean like necessarily they'll make a deep run in the playoffs. Do you think these additions give them the bump they need to make it into the playoffs?
No, I don't think so. I think it's close. It'll keep them in the hunt. Now, granted, everybody's still in the hunt. There's gonna be a great race to the end. That being said, I think the Atlanta, who we're probably going to talk about here in a little bit, has gotten better. Toronto may fall out here. Philadelphia is going to be an interesting one. They're going to be right in the thick of things, but I don't think it'll be these two new signings that put them over the edge. If they make it in, I think it's a combination of what they've already got going, an improvement maybe defensively, or it will be one of the other teams falling out. I don't necessarily, like when you sign Nico Ladero, you're like, okay, Nico Ladero brought Seattle from nothing to greatness in that 2016 year, right? I don't think we're turning around and be like, oh, Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy and Caden Clark brought Montreal from 11th to 7th, missed out on the play-in game, and then went on a run to win MLS Cup. I don't see that happening. I think there's a lot of other problems they need to fix, and again, it's a young team. It's going to take time, but I don't think these two are the end-all be-all answer.
Yep, I would agree. Considering how many open DP spots they have still open, they need to bring someone in at that level in order for me to really think that they've added the pieces they need to make that playoff push. These two in particular, Marshall Ruddy and Caden Clark, I don't think move the needle for them in terms of playoff push. Like you said, Atlanta strengthened around them. We'll talk about Philly in a minute, but you could argue that they've strengthened around them as well. We've talked about DC. DC added some people as well. They're only 1 point behind Montreal, so they're in the mix as well. It's going to be hard. Like you said, everybody from 9th to 15th is within 5 points of each other. So you really got to like add to strengthen your team if you're going to make this push because it's just too close together to be making some fringe moves to try to take a risk on hoping that they pan out and bump you into the playoffs.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so let's move into the big one then. The team that's been making a lot of moves as of late, the New England Revolution. One of those teams that we were just talking about as being in that mix from 9th to 15th, that 5 point mix of the playoffs. They have made a move, a trade involving DeJuan Jones and Will Sands, a trade for Henry Kessler and Tim Parker, and have also brought in highly valued Argentine winger Luca Langoni. Where do you want to start? Let's start with Will Sands, DeJuan Jones trade. So the trade for DeJuan Jones means that the Crew will get DeJuan Jones from New England Revolution, and New England in return will get Will Sands and 600,000 of GAM, 300,000 guaranteed in 2024, 300,000 guaranteed in 2025, and more confusing MLS stuff in there. I don't really know. Just 600,000 in GAM and Will Sands. I'll be honest, I think Columbus have fleeced here. I think it's dastardly that they're allowed to continue to improve their team like this. It's disgusting. It's terrible. Like, can we put a transfer ban on Columbus? This is getting ridiculous at this point. As if Wilfred Nancy needs more assets to work with. He just added one of the best left backs in the league. And I know they don't I don't think they play with four in the back. I'm not 100% sure. At least they didn't last year.
They don't.
But he should still be fine if he's playing as a wing back. It's disgusting, but I think the direction of the move makes sense for New England, but I just feels like maybe they could have gotten more out of it. I know they're trying to clear cap, and they definitely do that in this case because Will Sands takes up like zero salary cap. But 600,000 in GAM, considering Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy just got traded for 1.3 million in GAM, feels a little bit low. What are your thoughts?
No, so this was, how do I phrase it? This was a straight up, we are going to prepare for the up and coming assertion, if you will, of Peyton Miller, right? They are all in on Peyton. He's been playing a very, very large amount of games. Yeah, he started all three Leagues Cup games, and he just got kind of put into the MLS mix. And he had an assist in his first two games in MLS. Not to mention playing basically every minute of Leagues Cup until he got injured. And this is where it's going to backfire on them. They were all in on him. Will Sands was going to be coverage in case, for whatever reason, Peyton didn't pan out. Now Peyton Miller is injured, and I don't know what the extent of that injury is just yet. I don't think anything's been released, but they were all in on Peyton Miller. So what do? They go ahead and say, okay, DeJuan Jones, you are, I don't know if I'd say surplus to requirement, but we have a lot of plans in place long term. We want to free up some cap space for that. We'll let you go. We'll get a left back in return, and we'll get a whole bunch of roster flexibility in GAM. Not to mention his salary off the book, right? I think he was like the fourth highest earning left back in the league. The only person really willing to take that on is Columbus, and bing bang bosh, there you go. You got yourself a trade. I don't mind it. I don't mind it, right? We're talking of a New England side that is still pushing for the playoffs. And again, they're definitely in it. No doubt about it. They've played 23 games. They still have 2 games left. They could win their next 2 games and be in the playoffs, like once they catch up to everybody else. So they're not out of it at all, but they're also have an eye on the future. And, with the window closing and the way that they wanted to do things, they had to pull a trigger here, and they did. So I don't hate it, and I know Caleb Porter likes Will Sands from his time in Columbus, or I'm sure he does. That's why he was taking that move in and entertaining that idea. But I think it's time to start moving on from players with value at the right time for New England, right? This isn't a win now team. They can get into the playoffs and make a run, sure, but what's going to happen next year? You're going to bring back the same group and run it back again and try and sneak in? No, you want to start prepping for it, right? So to do that, you need roster flexibility. To do that, you need to bring in the youth players. And Jones is a great player, right? I think we constantly rate him in the top 5 of his position every year. And that doesn't change with his move to Columbus. But this is the necessary, I don't want to say necessary evil, but the necessary steps you need to take in a salary capped league where you need to make decisions like this that are for the benefit of either the long term or the short term. And I don't hate it. I don't. I think it will benefit New England in the long run, so long as Peyton Miller is healthy. He left the Leagues Cup game in a boot on last Thursday.
Yeah, I mean it's a move in the right direction for them, I think. It makes sense for them to kind of, after all this turmoil they've had since the Bruce Arena stuff last season, to just kind of hit the reset button. It's just like the trade obviously is worse considering the fact that Peyton Miller got hurt immediately right after it, which is just, it's not their fault. It's just unlucky. But the reality is it just makes the trade a lot worse because that was, like you said, a huge part of the trade was freeing up time for Peyton Miller there, which probably not going to see much of that this season. Yeah, maybe not. But why don't we move on to the next move here? So we'll go into the next trade, and that is involving Henry Kessler moving over to St. Louis City SC in exchange for Tim Parker and 600,000 in 2025 GAM, just to specify, nothing for this season, for next season's GAM. At first, I was a little lost with the trade, but did a little looking around on Twitter and stuff, and it made a lot more sense once I was hearing people talk about it some more. The move for New England, I guess, is somewhat similar to the one with DeJuan Jones, where I think it's mainly to free up salary because Kessler, I believe, is on like $1 million in salary. It's high salary, and he was guaranteed the salary through 2025. Whereas Tim Parker, who's also making about $1 million, his contract ends at the end of this year. So they can get him off the books after this year and have that flexibility going into next year. Plus, you also got 600,000 in GAM for it. So to me, this was a very good move for them. It makes sense to move on from Kessler and give yourself the flexibility and more money to work with next year when you can kind of reset and look for something new. And I'm sure Parker will probably move on after the season unless they can get him back on a much cheaper deal. But I don't think Tim Parker is in the direction that this team wants to go. So it's just a way to get money off the books faster.
I don't know if I necessarily just agree with that. I think you're looking at a team that Henry Kessler, and I like Henry Kessler. I thought he brought a lot of fun there. I don't think Caleb Porter rated him. I think there was a big center back controversy between Dave Romney, Xavier Arriaga, and Henry Kessler. And yeah, I mean there was a series of play there where he was on the bench and didn't make it in there, and they had a pretty good run of form. Then he kind of comes in and he's starting, not starting, starting, not starting, starting, not starting. So going from a day in, day out starter to kind of rotating and flexing in there, that's not thrilling. I wouldn't love that as a player myself. And I do think that, I mean, you're looking at teams, it's St. Louis and it's New England who have conceded, I mean, 47 and 46 goals apiece. And that is by far and away like bottom quartile of the league, right? It may have just been that they need a fresh start and they could show out and be really solid. But if you look at the New England makeup of center backs right now, it is not a young group, to put it
Say
lightly.
it. Say the line.
It's not a young group. There are a lot of people who um, they find themselves on the wrong side of a certain number.
Oh, come on, just say the
I
line.
won't give it. I won't give you the satisfaction. Andrew
Wrong
Fowler.
side of 30.
Andrew Farrell's been playing since he was about 3. So, I mean, I don't know how many more years he's got left. Jonathan Mensah at 34 is very sparsely used. They got a 19-year-old center back. Dave Romney's 31. Parker's 31. Xavier Arriaga's 29. So, where they go from here, I have no idea. But I'm not so sure that they don't try and keep hold of him if he plays well this year. Because right now they've got a center up. They've got a center back problem where they are conceding lots of goals and they need somebody to stop that. Tim Parker, very experienced, very no nonsense, very sort your crap out and let's get it done, right? If he shows the leadership skills that we know of him to have and at Red Bull and St. Louis and all the other places he's been at, Vancouver and such, I'm not shocked if he doesn't come back and they release Mensah and he's part of that group again on a cheaper deal. I don't think that they're going to give him designated player money or anything, but he's 31. He's definitely not quite, finished yet. I mean, Tim Ream at 37 just joined the league and everybody's buzzing about him, right? So I think he's got years to give. I wouldn't necessarily say that he's not in their plans, but I also would not be, I wouldn't be shocked with anything come 2024-5 off season for New England with all this roster space and ready to make some moves because this team needs a lot of rebuilding.
Yeah, add to the fact that every single one of those center backs that you talked about, besides Thiago, the 19-year-old, all their contracts end after this year. So,
Oh, do they really?
yeah, so it will. You could be right in that he could be potentially be in the mix. I would say at most they probably keep 2 of these guys just based on whoever they think performs the best and is willing to take a reasonable contract. But I don't see them splashing. What actually, I won't say that. Maybe they splash money to bring one of them back. I'd say probably between Parker and Romney, but we'll see. Or possibly Arriaga. I keep forgetting about him. Okay, all right. So then let's move on to the last move that they've made for splashing a lot of money to bring in the Boca Juniors 22-year-old winger Luca Langoni. 6.2 million euros spent to bring him in. Don't ask me the conversion. I forget. It might have been like $7 million.
Come on, nerd.
What do you think? What do you think of the move? Clearly, I think it fits the theme of the moves they made this summer. But what do you think of the fee spent, his potential, what he's done so far in his career?
This sort of move makes me really glad that Red Bull don't just go spend money on anybody. You're dropping $7 million, give or take, according to Connor's very accurate transition, on a dude as a 22-year-old winger whose best contribution. I mean, he had a decent showing in 2022. Decent showing at 6 goals, 6 goals in 950 minutes or so. He hasn't played a single year over 1,000 minutes. He hasn't scored more than 2 goals, or he hasn't scored more than 5 goals since 2022. And he has not ever had a season with more than 1 assist. I am all for being proven wrong because I said this about New York City too, but I'm so tired of teams just buying exciting dribblers from Argentina for big money on U22 contracts and hoping it pans out. That you see the Boca Juniors badge attached to the name. You see this Argentina flag that goes and big money, and you think he's gonna. I personally, and again, I haven't seen him play. We're only going off of stats, and I think that's what a lot of people do these days. There's nothing in his statistics outside of one season 2 years ago that would even remotely warrant something like this. I mean, there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done. in this team, I'm not sure this is the guy to do it. Now, I'm more than happy to be proven wrong, but I don't love it.
It's a move in the right direction for them, considering all the other moves they're making, where you're looking for flexibility to build up a team for next year and get some potential. But I agree with you. This feels like a massive overpay. And it's not the only one, like you talked about, that we've seen lately. I think back to like Ojeda for NYCFC, where they spent like I think they may have actually spent like 7 million on him, and I don't think his resume was anything wild either. And we've kind of yet to see anything from Ojeda so far. Granted, he hasn't had a ton of chances, but
But
um,
that's the whole point, right? When you spend that sort of money, you
yeah,
expect them to come in
you gotta
and
play
do
them.
something. Yeah,
Yeah,
you expect them to do something, right?
yeah. But
So,
I do think in this case they would probably like. I don't think New England's in the same situation as NYC, where NYC has 8 billion wingers on their team, so it's probably hard to break through. I think he's got a better shot to play here, considering literally everybody's in the infirmary right now.
well, and I agree with that, but here's the other thing: they're all going to come back eventually.
I know.
What
Well,
happens then, right? You've got and I meant like Dylan Barrero, Nacho Heel on the left wing. This is a player on the right wing, but are you going to bump Esmir Bajraktarovic for Luca Langoni when he's one of your most exciting attacking profiling players? I'm not, right? That'd be now again, unless they're planning on him to be gone by the end of the year, then it's a different story, right? This is the thing with moves is you don't quite know what the plan is. I would assume if you're teams that don't get sponsored by an energy drink, that usually you go in with like a 3-year plan. Like, okay, I expect this guy to be gone, or we should sell him on at this high level. Now, is that the case? I don't know. But you're going to come back. Chancalay is going to come back. Barrero's going to come back. Those are two players you're not just going to sit on the bench. Be like, okay, guys, we'll get you back. Nacho Hill, maybe. Emma Boateng. I mean, you're not bumping Emma Boateng. You're out of your mind if you bump Emma Boateng. That's MLS legend right there. You're right. I think the word overpay feels right in the moment, and happy to be proven wrong, but I do feel like that is it's not great personally.
what I will say in the defense of New England here is Barrero and Nacho Heel, both injured right now and both out of contract at the end of this year. So there could be a chance that they move on for both of them, in
Yeah,
which case the winger competition now gets narrowed down to Chunkalai, Langoni, and Esmir. And if you have the thought that Esmir could be out the door by even summer of next year, then Langoni makes sense to bring in if you
sure,
think
sure, sure. And then
now is
you're
the right time to.
yeah, no disagreements there. Like I said, there's definitely a plan here we don't see, but at the moment from the layout, it just feels a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think we kind of covered where we think the direction of these moves are going. And considering we still have a bunch more moves to talk about, I'm going to move on to Columbus here because we had talked about the Dwan Jones trade. So while we're somewhat on the topic of Columbus, let's talk about them bringing in Andres Herrera, a right back from River Plate. It is a loan move. I don't know if there's an option to buy, but adding even more depth into this ridiculous Columbus team. What do you think about the move?
What is there to say? I mean, we talk about ambition. We talk about like you got two conferences, and these guys they each have like two teams that are just leading the way. You got LAFC in the West, you got Columbus in the East that are just if every team had the ambition that these guys did, this league is a top five, maybe top five is a stretch. It's a top 10 league in the world without a doubt. Like there's no question about it because the rules allow you to buy players like this or loan players in like this. Like this isn't something where they're like, oh, they're breaking the rules. Like you can go out and do this and make it a really, really exciting league, but not everybody does that. Now, I know some teams have bad contracts they got to get out of them, whatever, but the ambition out of this group is just next level, man. And again, he's another guy who has gotten consistent minutes in Argentina. He's got, I mean, over 140 appearances between two teams in Argentina at 25 years old. I mean, the experience is there, the competitiveness is there, the championships are there. I mean, he's got everything this team is looking for. And I'm speechless at how driven this Columbus team is to get better year over year over year.
Yeah, I like the move for them, not because necessarily the right wing back spot has been a problem for them. I mean, it's hard to pick any position on the field that's been a problem for them, but I think it gives them more of a defensive option there as opposed to whether it's like Arston or Farsi playing there, who's great going forward, maybe not as good going back. So I think Herrera gives them an option there where they can be more defensive, or even maybe just an option to go four in the back and just play a flat line. So I think it's good to give them flexibility. It's great depth, as you mentioned, great experience to bring in as well, even if it's not experience within this league, just a very experienced player in general. Yeah, I fully agree with you. They're pushing, they're moving the envelope, or what's the saying? It's like,
Pushing
is
the
it
envelope.
they're pushing the envelope on what a team should look like in this league with the current financial restrictions.
Yeah. And again, I think we are starting to see more teams get there. It just needs to go faster.
I
Um,
agree.
and that's the crazy part about it, right? Like we're looking at a guy like Mo Farsi, who again, a lot of us rated very highly. We thought he was on his way out at preseason. Then you're saying, okay, well, who's next? Well, Max Farfin's next. And we're like, who the heck is Max Arston, right? And he comes in and is just a lockdown, either left or right sided guy, does the job as you expect him to, it buys into the system. And now you've brought in experience and, as you mentioned, a little bit more defensive minded. And any game situation, you have a combination of 11 players that will instantly match up with whoever is up against you on the other side. And it is just wonderful, wonderful to see. And again, I wish there were more teams like the Columbus Crew who were pushing for that sort of consistency across their side. Because again, it's quite clear that you can do this. It is not, they haven't broken any rules. They've done well, and they hit on a lot of young players as well, right? Patrick Schulte coming in and holding down the goalkeeper spot. We just talked about Arston and Farsi, and players of that nature who are coming out of the academy and doing well. Aiden Morris, another good example, who moved on to a very high level team in England. It is just really
Don't boast their egos.
it is really, really nice to see how they've done. Yeah, I mean, listen, it is something that you wish you saw. And again, I think we're getting to a point where more teams are following that suit. And in 2 to 3 years, when you can get out of these bad contracts and do as you please, you're going to see a really nice balance across the league. So
Yeah, well, I don't think we have to ask the question of what direction Columbus is going. There's only one
straight to the
direction.
moon.
There is only one direction they're going, and it is literally up and only up.
To the moon.
In an ever-changing world, the term AI gets thrown around pretty frequently. But what does it really mean? Is it a self-functioning robot set to take over the world, like in the movies? Is it the world's next supercomputer? Are your children asking you these questions and you don't know how to respond?
Well, don't you worry, because our friends at AI Digitales are here to help. AI Digitales and AI for Kids podcast can answer all of these questions and more with a family friendly and kid focused approach. As an engineer myself, I've always loved learning new things in any way that I could, and AI Digitales has the perfect approach for all ages.
This pod is centered around shorter, easy to consume, and most importantly, fun content that is separated by age level. So you won't have 4 hours of Andrew going on about RBNY before you get to the good stuff. Their episodes are split to engage elementary, middle plus, and even some parent focused content to get the concept of AI across to all levels.
So, if you or your kids ever want to know how your phone recognizes your faces to get unlocked, or how games know when to naturally get harder without you changing the settings, give a listen to the AI Digitales and AI for Kids podcast today.
All right, let's move on then to the team that you were just talking about pushing the envelope in the Western Conference, LAFC, who've been busy this window and may not be done yet. So far in this summer transfer window, they have brought in obviously Olivier Giroud, the big one. We'd covered him before, so we probably won't cover him too much here. But they also have brought in Lewis O'Brien from Nottingham Forest. So why don't we start? Why don't we cover O'Brien since we kind of already spoke about Giroud, and then we'll talk about somebody else. But I won't spoil that yet.
Oh, look at
So
you.
what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on Lewis O'Brien coming to
Yeah,
LAFC?
love this move. I thought
Yeah, I know you're a big Lewis
love
O'Brien
this
fan,
move,
so
man. This dude is a baller. When you can make a DC team that's that bad look half decent, you're a baller. And I mean, he came into DC back in, what was it, 21 was the year, or was it COVID time? Oh, 23. It was even earlier than that. That's wild. He's only here for 3 months. It felt like he was here forever.
it was just
Um,
alone. Yeah.
yeah, it was just a loan move, but that DC team in 23 that
Oh, they
finished,
missed the playoffs.
yeah, they missed the playoffs. They finished 12th. Can you imagine what they would have been without him? I mean, they would have been rival in Toronto for the spoon, right? His time in DC was, again, I think it stands out because you're like, oh wow, like look at this guy who did really well for a really bad team. He only had 1 goal, 1 assist. Like I'm not trying to blow him up as like an absolute game changer, but his work rate, his creativity off the ball, I think it fits in so much better with LAFC than it did with DC, where it was literally him trying to dribble through 4 players and then just give it to Benteke and see what he could do. But in 17 games, just a little bit over 1,500 minutes, a goal and assist. And I know that doesn't jump off the page like, oh, this guy's amazing, and probably why DC didn't bring him back. But LAFC make players just different breed when they play with them here. The only person they haven't made any better was Aaron Long, because, I mean, how do you make somebody better when you're already at the top of your game? So the move here, I think it just fits in again with an LAFC side that, again, as we mentioned, pushing the envelope, really trying to be the best at what they can do, and balances that midfield really well. You've got Bogusz in the attacking, midfield. You got Atuesta kind of as a shuttling number 8. You got Ile Sanchez as a true 6, and then Lewis O'Brien can fit in a couple different areas, more attacking than anything else. But if Atuesta were to drop in, you can put O'Brien in and go a little bit farther. Tim Tillman, USMNT national team player. All of those players, and again, it's very clear what LAFC system is: counterattacks. And Bogusz is very good in transition. Bouanga, very good in transition. Giroud, I'd be interested to see how he does in transition, but as just a target player off, so Bouanga can run in behind, have a day, my guy, right? I think O'Brien fits in really well in that transition game. He's expansive. He runs really well off the ball. He gets in behind off, and he's very, very attacking minded. I think he's going to fit in really well with this transition style of play
You know what I hate?
when I'm right.
I hate the fact that we looked at this team in the offseason, have like 12 players on the roster, and now they've built this.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell? How did this happen? How did they just magically build this absolute beast of a roster when they were
Somebody
down to like 10 players at some point in the offseason?
somebody walked away from the kitchen and then John Thornton hopped in and cooked.
Oh my
Dude
goodness.
is dude is and we knew this was going to happen, but at this level of cooking, I wasn't ready for. The Atuesta thing, I
Yeah.
was like, I thought the Atuesta thing was gonna be like the peak. Like, oh man, look at this guy. He comes in and brings back one of the old, guys from the early LAFC days. Like, oh, good for him, right? Bang,
Mhm.
here's a really talented Lewis O'Brien. Bang, here's France's top goal scorer in country's history. Bang, here's a possible rumor of getting somebody else that I won't spoil it because I know you want to introduce it. But and you know what's crazy is they really haven't added that much. They've just added the right people at the right position. They haven't added a ton in the back, right? You've got the Jesus Maria, the Aaron Long, the Segura, the Chanot. Those 4 are kind of holding you down. Ryan Hollingshead is playing wherever he wants, and Sergi Palencia is the only real right back right now. But and knock on wood for the group, the team's been relatively healthy. That's been a big major plus for them, because any one of these guys goes down, now your depth is even thinner. But man, that is it's a credit to, again, pushing the envelope with what you want to do. I mean, we saw LAFC go in, win MLS Cup Supporter Shield, and then just turn the roster over and keep pushing to get better. It's not something you see out of all these teams, and I'd absolutely love if this set the standard. And I think for some teams it will. We'll get there.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, they might be. I mean, you compare them to Columbus and they're thin, but I mean, in fairness, you compare any team in the league to Columbus and they're thin. But
Right.
I think they have the right amount of depth where, yes, they've been fortunate that they've been healthy, but they do have a guy in like each general zone of the field who can step in and be the next guy. Like in the attack when you've brought in Giroud now. You've got Giroud, you've got Oliveira, Bouanga, and Bogusz. You've got four of them. Obviously, not all four of them are going to be able to start. So somebody's going to be able to hop in there if something happens to someone. Same thing in the midfield. You've now got Illy Sanchez, Tim Tillman, Atuesta, and now you brought in Lewis O'Brien who can get in that mix. Even at center back too. Center back is Murillo, Aaron Long, Eddie Segura, Chanel. Like that's a good center back group. Like if somebody goes down, the next guy is going to be able to step in there. So they may not be super deep in terms of like having four or five guys at every position, but I think they've got the right amount of depth where they'd be all right. Unless they just got absolutely floored by injuries like New England has.
Yeah.
But
And even if they did, you got more people waiting in the wings, it sounds like.
yeah. And one of those people might be another Frenchman joining the party. Antoine Griezmann has had some strong links with LAFC. Obviously, rumors and stuff have been going on with the recent move for Giroud, and obviously they added Lloris in the winter transfer window. And so Griezmann has always been linked with moves to MLS. This is kind of a good situation for him to move into, where he's got a couple buddies on a team and a team that is very ambitious and can make these types of moves happen. I'll just ask you, do you think the Griezmann move gets done this window?
This window, no. Next
Okay.
window, yes. End of the season.
So winter
Yeah.
25.
So I think they go without him for this year. And then they come in and get him one more window past.
Do you think somebody moves on in order to bring him in?
No, they don't need to. To my knowledge, they don't need to.
It may not be a need, but do you think in terms of like playing time, they would probably need to? Do you think someone moves on in order to make the playing time to bring in Griezmann? Or
No.
would they just go with a system change and play like a 4-2-3-1 kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I don't think they need to do anything. Like you mentioned, they're one deep at every position. You can go two. Like that's not an illegal thing. Now he's got the flexibility to play in a lot of areas, right? He can play off of the main striker. He can play out wide every once in a while. He can play as a main number nine, and it all varies in that sense. So you know what I would most likely assume happens is you're going to have Giroud as your nine, Griezmann just off him, Bouanga on one side, and then a rotation of Oliveira, Bogusz on the right side. And that would be kind of the setup. And then you've got Tillman, Atuesta, O'Brien rotating and Sanchez rotating in the group behind them, and then your usual back four. I believe that FIFA listed their top rated players coming into FIFA 25 or EFC 25, whatever it may be. I think he is the 10th highest rated player. I'm not saying it's the end all be all of what's going on here, but to get anybody of that level into the league right now is massive. And you talk a lot about retirement and who do you open the door up for being a longer or a later on signing, right? And I think this is one of the guys that you do that for.
I mean, this team's going to be disgusting if they bring in Griezmann on the top of all of this. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's
It feels like the Bale move, but long term, right?
yeah, a little bit more long term than that. Yeah, I would agree with that. That's a good comparison for it.
That's
I
that's the
don't
vibe.
I don't think we need to answer the question of what direction these moves are pushing LAFC in.
Well,
It's a very Colum
I think it's a super interesting thought where teams like Columbus and LAFC, what are they pushing for long term? And it feels like both of those sides are not only pushing for MLS Cup, Supporter Shield, but also to be better in international competitions, to be able to go up against the Liga MX sides and win. It feels like that push is now coming more and more frequently, which I think is really exciting.
yeah. I mean, we'll kind of for that one, we'll have to wait and see what happens for CONCACAF Champions League when all those pieces kind of come together and next in 2025. But in terms of the season, I think LAFC's bolstered well for a strong playoff push and supporter shield push. But one team that definitely needs to make a lot of moves to make a push late in this season and has the tools to do it is Atlanta United, who have sold everybody under the sun this window, have brought in a ton of money. However, they need to start spending some money to make replacements. Obviously, as we know, they've moved on from Almada, Caleb Wiley, and Yakumakis, and have brought in roughly $40 million to spend some of the money they have already. In an absolute perfect move, Atlanta have gone and brought in someone from Atalanta. That needs to be a connection immediately between those two clubs. They've brought in Alexei Miranchuk for 12 million euros. He is an Russian attacking midfielder. Big money signing for them. Seemingly the Thiago Almada replacement. I'm assuming you're going to want me to give my thoughts first, but
Go right ahead.
uh,
It's your show, man. Today at least.
so I'm not 100% sure how to feel about this. I mean, it's obviously a big money move, and I think it's a different type of big money move from a team like New England, who spent a lot of money to bring in Langoni. Uh, Moranchuk, I think, has more on his CV to back up the fee than Langoni does. He was most recently playing with Atalanta, played about 1,200 minutes to help them finish fourth. He had 3 goals, 5 assists. Not exactly sure where he plays for them, if he plays in a 10 or if he plays a little bit deeper. His goals and assists make it feel like maybe he's playing a little bit deeper. But one really interesting thing that I did learn from, I think maybe the Atlanta subreddit, was that he was one of the best across all of Europe in terms of chance creations per 90. So he is a very good playmaker, which I think could be a great tool for this team. The only thing that has me worried is we're adding the playmaker before we've added anybody to finish the chances. I think Rios has done a really good job, but I think that's a temporary thing because it's just a loan move. Maybe they make it permanent. I don't know. But it's going to be, I think I'm tentative to be super excited about it until I see who they bring in to bolster the attack, specifically in terms of striker. But I think there's good potential there. It could be a very good move for them. He's very experienced, and obviously, as I mentioned, is a very good playmaker for them.
So I think you're just kind of glossing over this run of the Europa League that they were in, where he had, when he was given the time to play, he picked up 4 assists in the last game of the group, but also,
It's because FBref doesn't have any of the Europa
see,
League
that's
stuff
why
on
you
there.
use bad stats. Dude played in 10 of the 13 Europa League final game or Europa League games. I don't, whatever, made up tournament. Um, and when given the time to actually play, right, more than 5-10 minutes, he picked up 4 assists, 3 of them in 2 games in the round of 16 against Sporting CP in Portugal, and that got
He assisted
them.
every goal in that
He
leg.
assisted every goal in that tie, right?
Mhm.
And then doesn't play against Liverpool, doesn't really play against Marseille, doesn't see the field against Leverkusen. But the fact that he was able to perform at that level, because we talk about it all the time, like people get all hyped, like, oh my God, he played in the Champions League. And then it's like he had one appearance for 3 minutes, and it's like, but it still counts. No, this guy actually performed in the European cups, right? He was solid in about 3,000 minutes for both Atalanta and Torino, where he picked up 7 goals, 8 goals, and what is that, 14 assists or so in 3,000 minutes. Tons of, as you mentioned, tons of chance creation ability, and really, really excited for what he can bring. He's got a good trophy cabinet, and I have no doubt in my mind that Gareth Lagerwey is ready to build around him. This feels so Nico Ladero 2016 when he did that at Seattle, right? It feels so much like that, where they didn't have a great team around him at the time. They brought him in. He was able to make it work with whatever they had, and then they put the pieces around him, and they go on and are one of the best teams for half a decade. That's what this feels like it's setting up for me.
Well, I'm here hoping that you're right. However, you do have a track record of jinxing things. So
Oh, did I say that intentionally? Oh, sorry.
the only thing that's making, so for those that haven't really like followed Atlanta's transfers over the last few transfer windows, they've gone from a they've shifted their like transfer, I don't want to say policy, but their ideology, I guess, where when they started off as a team in the league, it was very heavily focused on bringing in South American talent and not necessarily only from the South American League. Obviously, Josef came over from the Italian League, but it was like Miguel Almiron, Tito Villalba, Josef Martinez. It's all like South American talent. And in the last few transfer windows, it's been a complete shift over to European talent,
Mm-hmm.
where you're bringing in Yakumakis, you're bringing in Sabalo Janitze, you're bringing in Jean de Silva, now Moranchuk as well. And it hasn't worked so far, but I'm willing to give it more time because I don't think they've brought in the right coaches to work with that talent. So I'm hoping that, I mean, I've seen them rumored with Patrick Vieira. I think I'd be very on board for that. But if they can bring in the right coach to match these transfers, I think it could be beneficial. But it does give me a little bit of pause because it hasn't worked so far.
Well, I think the difference here, right, is this is a guy 28 years old in his prime. You're paying big money for him to get over here. I think you need to surround him. But again, you've got Saba Lobjanidze out there. You've got Jean de Silva. You've got Daniel Rios and TRA. And you've got players in there who at least can get a job done for now, right? We're talking about a team that's sitting just on the edge of the playoffs. We're talking about a team that is trying to hold on best they can. 35 goals scored. You're looking at a top four that's at least over 40. So if you can get your goals per game up by one or two every couple of games, you're sitting pretty, right? So they just need a little something to get themselves on a run. Then they'll figure it out after that. They're going to have that money for a little, for a little bit. And I think it's important that they get it right, right? You've got all this money, and that's really, really great. It would be a complete shame to just go out and spend money on anybody just because they have a transfer market value of 15 million, right? You got to get this right. You have to find somebody that's going to fit the system, and you got to find a coach who's going to make it work, right? And you mentioned that beforehand, like they haven't had the coaches to make it work at this point. You have to be able to put together a team that a coach is going to work well with, right? If you gave Tata Martino a group of MLS vets, a couple of old retired European guys, and one half decent designated player,
Give
I
him a
don't.
Bruce Arena lineup.
Yeah, you give him a Bruce Arena line, he does nothing with it. Respectfully, right? You have to make sure it all fits, and it'd be really, really great just to go in and be like, "Yep, let's go get." Like there was rumors of like Miranchuk's brother is out of contract and bringing him in on a free, and it's like, yeah, that'd be funny, but is it the
It's the
right?
Heel brothers.
Yeah, is it
They'll
the
make it
right use?
Russian.
Is it the right use of that sort of money? I doubt it. Yeah, a little bit less. Actually, relatively successful in Russia, but yeah, you got to get it right. End of the day, you got to get it right. So I think this is a great starting point. Where you move on from here is important.
Yep, I agree. All right, well, why don't we move on then to the end of the episode? I think we've covered enough transfers here. We've been going for about an hour, so I think it's a good place to wrap it up. I think we've covered majority of the moves in. I know there's a couple of other ones that we haven't talked about, and maybe we'll cover it in a future episode, and as well as a bunch of moves out as well, some big ones, some failed moves as well. I'd love to talk about RB&Y fail moves. That's definitely on the agenda, on the card. We'll talk about it at some point. Hope you all enjoyed. Am I doing the outro on this?
Go ahead. I'd love to sit back
You
and do
love to have me do the outro.
it.
I
Yeah,
hate doing the
go
outro.
ahead.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Make sure to follow us on any place where you can get podcasts, Spotify, Apple, wherever. Make sure to follow us on social media, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok. Those are our main ones. Eventually, Instagram will be making a comeback, allegedly. Um, yeah. Anything else to add?
You didn't pick up or I haven't heard yet from you the ending word. What are we ending on?
Oh, I didn't think about the
Oh,
word.
of course not. Yeah, you don't prioritize your
Do I just make
podcast.
up a word?
You can make up a word. You can do anything you want.
I'll think about it for next week. I'm
Told me
gonna
that
put it on
last week too.
hiatus.
Told me that last week too. Uh,
Yeah. You have to remind me.
that's right. I forgot. I'm your schedule keeper as well.
You're my alarm clock.
Yeah.
You're my reminder app. Well, next time I'll think of a word.
All right. Well, until then, y'all. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one. See ya.